Could this be how the Ten Commandments would look like, written in Paleo-Hebrew, the script of that time? The Siloam inscription and the Hezekiah tunnel. This is not the original. The original is now in Turkey. This is a copy. Look at the script. It is put there, placed there. The Siloam, the Hezekiah tunnel was built by King Hezekiah, and who was the prophet at that time? Isaiah. So very likely Isaiah would have used the same script, the Paleo-Hebrew, to write his book. This concludes the history of writing. The history of writing the Bible. The history of writing is too vast a subject to be done here. It's history of writing as it pertains to the Bible, the development through the thousands of years of history. And we've seen the changes. Language is not static. Even our own English language, we've seen the old Victorian, we've seen his the Shakespearean English, and then the Tyndall English, and now today's modern English. So even then, it's not static. Over the centuries, it has changed. And more than anything, this, what's his name? Albright, a foremost archaeologist, albeit not a Christian, but he did a lot of excavation in Palestine. We call it Palestine because Canaan, we refer it as Palestine, the old name Palestine, Romans that gave that name to that area. And with each things that he digs up from the ground, you can kind of match it with the biblical account. More so the culture of that time, and above all, my emphasis is the writing of that time. And I haven't done the Gaza calendar yet. They found a tablet with old Phoenician writing they call the Gaza calendar, and from that you can it dates back to the time of David and Solomon, and you can kind of suspect that this was the script they used then. And then similarly with the Siloam inscription. Siloam inscription was found in the Hezekiah tunnel. It was built by Hezekiah. And then he put an inscription there to tell us how they dug the tunnel. A group coming out from the bottom, from the Siloam pool, another group coming down from Gihon Springs, and they meet in the middle. And so that's that inscription there. And we can see from that the writing. So we could make the conjecture that Isaiah, who was the prophet at that time, possibly used that script to write his scrolls. Later we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Isaiah scrolls. By this time, the writing has changed, so it was translated and copied in a new Hebrew, supplanting what Isaiah would have written the scroll in. And so from what he says here, we have the Lachish Ostraka also, which dates back to the time of Jeremiah. And the foregoing inscriptions, everything was in Hebrew. After the exile, all Jewish inscriptions, aside from a few very short ones on seals and coins, were written in Aramaic. So here again, up to the time of the exile to Babylon, understand that it's only the Jews that use Hebrew and speak Hebrew. Outside of it, in the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, Aramaic is spoken. What they speak in may not be what they write in, even though, so they spoke, the people around them, around the Jews, spoke Aramaic, and they wrote in cuneiform. So the script they used to write documents on may be different, is usually different from the spoken language as spoken script. And besides, Aramaic and Old Hebrew has about the same time history, and there are many dialects in Aramaic. Jesus spoke a dialect of Aramaic, so when we say Jesus spoke Aramaic, we seem to jump to the conclusion, oh, this is a holy language. No, the people around them spoke Aramaic, and there are many dialects. And then when they went into exile in Babylon, what happened was Babylonia spoke Aramaic. So it's not everyone that, they were taken into exile to Babylon. Understand this, the poor, the useless dregs of society was left to fend for themselves in Jerusalem. The elites, the priests only they were taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. He was smart. There are only one meritorious immigration. So people will hear of Daniel going into exile and working in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. So he would then have to learn Aramaic and spoke in Aramaic. So he wrote the book of Daniel in Aramaic. That's how it came about. And Ezra, who lived through the exile too, wrote in Aramaic. Albeit by this time, the Jewish scriptures were still in Hebrew. They could read it because they had to read their scriptures in Hebrew. It wasn't translated then. But because they lived in a place, they lived in exile that was Aramaic speaking, they spoke Aramaic, wrote in Aramaic. And then as the pictures show, the Hebrew script, the old Hebrew script was slowly not being used that much, and it adopted the Aramaic square script. That's why when we see the Hebrew of today, we see it very different from the Paleo-Hebrew. So that was a result of going to exile in Babylon. They changed the script now to resemble the Aramaic is square. So that's what we have today. But even then, it was still consonants and no vowel signs. It was much later, during the Masoretic time, that they add those dot, dot, dash, dash, the dagesh to represent the consonants A, E, I, O, U. And here, Albright continues, the Hebrews brought with them from their original Mesopotamian home the hallowed cosmogonic stories which they learned. So what this means was, in the time of Abraham and his ancestors, they came from that area around the Euphrates, from the Mesopotamia area. There were stories of creation, flood and stuff that were being told, folk tales more or less, that were being told repeatedly. And they brought with them in their travels to Haran and then down to Canaan, those same stories, which was later codified in scriptures. And what this says here is, and to it was added poetic narratives of the patriarch. What I gather this to mean is, initially, before Moses wrote anything down, especially Genesis, Moses was born there. So what happened? These were oral stories told by the patriarchs, and that's family from one generation to the other. Understand that Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, which is in that area, and came out. And so their ancestors would have known about the Garden of Eden, about creation. And then this would be told down centuries to Abraham's family, and they would carry it around. That's how the stories of Genesis came about, that Moses came up to learn this and to write it down and codified it as the book, one of the books in the Torah. And definitely there were editors to the first 5 books of Moses, but definitely also wrote, because Joshua said Moses kept an itinerary of all the places they went to from the day they first left Egypt. Imagine that. What was the Passover? The last day of their time in Egypt. And Moses kept a diary of that itinerary from that day on. Every time they stopped, he wrote things down every time. So there was a record. So Moses did write. There were scraps here and there possibly. And there were other stories being told here and there. Finally, there were editors, scribes that look at this collection of whatever was there and kind of arrange it into the form that we have today. Definitely. So that's why Jesus said, Moses gave you the Torah. He did. And finally, we're doing this series on biblical archaeology and writing. I'm finally kind of able to put the whole thing together. And as time goes by, we'll continue to add on to it to form a narrative to as what happened, then how did it come about to us? Imagine 4,000 years later, it came down to us. It's fascinating stuff. I never have ever in my life have been more in love with the Bible than now. It's like this. So why weren't we taught this? Why haven't I known about this? But it's not too late, and it's exciting.